We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet.
So David Attenborough, at the beginning of the UN conference, really put climate repair on the map as something we need to be thinking about and doing. But what does that actually look like?
Well, climate repair means doing deep and rapid emissions reduction and then going much further than that. Because much of the discussion we've been talking about over the last week and a half has been on the first topic. But we've got to embrace greenhouse gas removal. The current levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are frankly too high. And we've got to go and turn that down. We've got to bring some of those back into terrestrial or waters. We've got to get them out of the atmosphere.
Okay, and we hear a lot about nature-based solutions. Does this fall into the category of climate repair?
Oh, absolutely. The nature of climate repair on greenhouse gas removal includes a whole spectrum of fully nature-based solutions, as well as actually fully engineered solutions at the other extreme. And I think probably the largest is going to be what we term hybrid, where it's a combination of nature-based solutions and then being assisted, amplified by what we can do in terms of managing those natural systems.
And how do you define what a successful solution is? Is it to do with scale?
A successful solution has to be something where you've got enough scale. So I would argue something like a gigaton of carbon dioxide per year on a global basis for a given approach is something that should be of interest. But it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the scale. It's actually about whether it actually supports other aspects of society, communities, and public acceptability. All of these factors need to be brought to bear as to therefore selecting which are the appropriate ones to go and pursue.
Okay, and a lot of the sort of government policy documents have these emissions reductions or technology-based negative emission technologies embedded within them. And a big criticism is that they don't actually exist. Now, the Centre for Climate Repair is trying to build them. Is that right? And what's the reality that we can get there?
Well, today there are really no greenhouse gas removal approaches that we can hand on heart and say we're going to get an extra gigaton plus per year that we know will work. And therefore the Centre for Climate Repair at the University of Cambridge, our ambition in this area is to try and identify and then develop those which have got the most potential to be able to actually get us out of this mess.
Okay, so your job is to make those nets honest, but what if you can't do it?
Well, what if we can't do it? We're going to come on to actually what we might need to do otherwise. Nature itself will eventually allow the carbon dioxide and things like that in the atmosphere to get down if we've literally turned the taps off. But the timescales we're talking about are just so long. We're going to see some incredible, horrible changes in our ecosystems if we just let nature do it. But that's actually what we would then have to do, and then do something else to try and allow those effects to be ameliorated.
Okay, so Hugh, what is the else that we're looking at if we have to do something else?
Well, there are else's. We know, for instance, in addition to carbon dioxide, we've got methane, which is growing in concentration in the atmosphere faster than carbon dioxide. So one of the else's is removing methane from the atmosphere, which could turn out to be easier than removing carbon dioxide, because converting methane to carbon dioxide reduces its global warming impact by a factor of 100 or thereabouts. But then moving on, something else is that the warming of the planet is dictated by how much of the sun's energy gets through the atmosphere. And if we can reflect a small amount of sunlight, then there will be some cooling. And we know from historical events that when there's a lot of cloud cover, then places are cooler. When there are volcanic eruptions that put stuff up into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight, then we get cooling. Now, the oceans are too warm, and the warm water in the oceans is melting the Arctic. So reflectivity is one of those really important other things.
Okay, but how do you do it?
The first thing we know is that white fluffy clouds are reflective, and if we can, particularly over the oceans, increase the whiteness and fluffiness, the albedo of these clouds, then that's a bonus. That's got to be a good thing. By cooling, if we can, the waters in the Atlantic, say, not only are we helping to reduce the temperatures in the Arctic, which is important, but perhaps reducing the intensity and frequency of hurricanes and other dramatic events which are caused by warm waters.
What if we start in these interventions and then we kind of can we lose control of them? Because a lot of people are obviously very critical of interventions. What's the downside?
Well, there's a big downside of not doing anything. Let's remember that. So the option of not doing anything is not a good one. So there are going to be downsides whichever direction we go from here. We're not in a good place. I use this analogy of Apollo 13, that there weren't any obviously good solutions. In a couple of hours after the explosion on Apollo 13, none of the ideas on the table made any sense whatsoever. Yet the 3 astronauts came back alive and healthy. We're in that position where none of the options on the table look particularly appetizing. The side effects, unintended side effects, need to be monitored. We don't just launch into some technology without careful monitoring and proper research. And if it turns out that something that we're trying out doesn't look great, well, we can stop doing it. But we've got to make sure that we've got a whole raft of options, whether it's getting the oceans to absorb more carbon dioxide, converting methane to another gas, dealing with nitrous oxide, reflecting sunlight, growing seaweed, planting trees, flying less. I mean, there's so many things we've got to be doing.
Okay, and to make this, even in the research phase, the test phase, don't you really need to do it on a large scale to test it?
There's a large scale, there's a point where large scale is absolutely needed. But there are small scale things that you can do carefully and responsibly that will tell us a great deal. But at the moment, there's a nervousness about doing anything outdoors, any kind of experiments outdoors, for fear of being seen to have given up on, we're not succeeding in removing our greenhouse gas emissions, so let's use technology to fix the planet. No, we've got to succeed in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, but we've got to buy some time to get to that point.
Okay, and when you hear David Attenborough saying climate repair, I mean, he's like the father of our view of the natural world, if you like. And do you think he's kind of acknowledging that man has a responsibility to intervene?
Well, I feel really quite strongly that we need to listen to somebody like Sir David Attenborough, and I do think we have a responsibility to look after our natural world and the planet as a whole. And the argument that Hugh indicated, that one of the challenges that we face regarding actually resistance perhaps even to developing greenhouse gas removal approaches, and certainly some of the areas in these reflecting the sunlight, is this term we hear about called the moral hazard, where if we invest time and effort into developing some of these approaches, there's a risk that we will actually therefore reduce the impetus behind reducing emissions, which frankly we need to do. It's absolutely critical. But listening to Sir David Attenborough, I think we have not a moral hazard issue, we have a moral duty. In other words, we have a responsibility, mankind does, given the mess that we have created. We've got to clear it up, and therefore we have to look at these different approaches. And it can't all be done just with emissions reduction. We've got to go further and harder and faster than that alone. So I think we need to listen to Sir David and say, no, climate repair is something that we have a responsibility to actually undertake.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.